Sam Carter had spent the last 6 months floating through the quieter regions of the galaxy in his modest freighter, the Wayfarer. He was a mechanic by trade, the kind of person who could fix anything from a sputtering plasma drive to a rusted-out toaster. The galaxy was full of broken things, and Sam had found a way to make a decent living by patching them up. It was lonely work, but he didn't mind. He liked the solitude, the hum of the ship's engines, and the satisfaction of a job well done. It was a simple life, but it was his. The day began like any other. Sam was sitting in the cockpit of the Wayfarer, sipping a cup of strong, bitter coffee while checking the nav charts for his next destination. A faint ping interrupted his thoughts. He glanced at the console, where a flashing icon indicated an incoming signal. It wasn't unusual to pick up stray signals in deep space, but this one was different. It was old, ancient even. The metadata attached to the signal suggested it had been looping for centuries, possibly millennia. Intrigued, Sam tapped a few buttons to decode it. "Help? Please?" The voice was faint, distorted by age and interference, but unmistakably sentient. It wasn't human, but it spoke in a universal language Sam's translator could process. There was something raw and desperate in the tone, something that made his gut tighten. He checked the origin coordinates and frowned. The signal was coming from a sector marked as a graveyard, a region filled with the wreckage of battles long forgotten, ships abandoned to the void. Probably a trap, Sam muttered to himself. He'd heard stories of pirates using old distress signals to lure in unsuspecting ships. But something about this signal didn't sit right. It felt alive. Against his better judgment, he adjusted the Wayfarer's course and set off toward the source. The journey took several hours, during which the signal grew stronger and more insistent. Sam couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was sending it was aware of him, waiting for him to arrive. When he finally dropped out of hyperspace, the sight before him took his breath away. The ship was colossal, dwarfing anything Sam had ever seen. Its hull was a patchwork of metals and organic material, its once sleek design now marred by centuries of decay. Gaping holes revealed twisted corridors and shattered bulkheads. Despite its battered appearance, there was an undeniable beauty to it, a sense of grandeur that hinted at its former glory. It floated in the void, like a wounded animal. Silent, but not lifeless. Sam hesitated. Every instinct told him to turn around and leave, to let this ghost ship drift in peace. But then the voice came again, clearer this time. "Please, help me!" He couldn't ignore it. He brought the Wayfarer in closer, scanning the ship for any signs of danger. The results were inconclusive. No power readings, no life signs, nothing to indicate what might be inside. Taking a deep breath, he suited up and prepared to board. The airlock hissed as Sam entered the derelict vessel. The interior was even more unsettling than the exterior. The walls pulsed faintly, as though the ship itself were breathing. Organic tendrils snaked along the floor and ceiling, their bioluminescent glow casting eerie shadows. The air was heavy, thick with a metallic tang that clung to his tongue. He kept his plasma cutter close, ready for anything. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice echoing in the vast, empty corridors. For a moment there was silence. Then the voice replied, soft and almost childlike. "I am the ship." Sam froze. He'd heard of sentient ships before, but they were rare, relics of a bygone era. Most had been decommissioned or destroyed after their creators deemed them too unpredictable. "You're alive?" he asked cautiously. "Yes," the ship said, "but I am dying." The words sent a chill down Sam's spine. "What happened to you?" "Parasites," the ship replied. "They burrowed into me, feeding on my systems, corrupting my core. I have been trapped here for centuries, unable to move, unable to fight back. You are the first to answer my call." Sam scanned the walls, noting the strange, pulsating growths that seemed to spread like a disease. "Why me?" "Because you are human," the ship said simply. "Your kind is Resourceful, adaptive, I need you. Sam wasn't sure whether to feel flattered or terrified. He glanced at the tendrils underfoot, wondering if they were part of the ship or part of the infestation. What do you want me to do? Remove the parasites, the ship said. Purge them from my systems. In return, I will give you what remains of my power. I can be your ally, your weapon, your home. But first, I must be free. Sam considered his options. He could walk away, return to the Wayfarer, and pretend he'd never found this place. But something about the ship's voice, its raw desperation, struck a chord in him. It wasn't just a machine. It was a living being, suffering and alone. All right, he said finally. I'll help you, but you'd better keep your end of the bargain. I will, the ship promised. Thank you. As Sam delved deeper into the ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just made a deal with something far bigger and far more dangerous than he could comprehend. Sam tightened his grip on the plasma cutter as he ventured deeper into the massive ship. The corridors were a maze, twisting and branching in ways that defied conventional engineering. The faint glow of bioluminescent tendrils along the walls provided the only light, their eerie pulses casting flickering shadows. Each step echoed hollowly, accompanied by the occasional groan of metal under stress. The ship's voice occasionally guided him, faint and almost fragile, as though it were struggling to maintain a connection. You are approaching the central nexus, the ship whispered. The infestation is strongest there. Sam didn't respond immediately. He was focused on the environment around him, scanning for any movement, any sign that the parasites were aware of his presence. The silence felt unnatural, oppressive, as if the ship itself were holding its breath. He had seen enough derelicts to know that the quiet was often the calm before something went terribly wrong. How many of these things are we dealing with? He asked finally, his voice low but firm. Thousands, the ship replied, but most are dormant, feeding on my systems. Only a few remain active. They will sense you soon. Sam swallowed hard but didn't stop. He had committed to this, and he wasn't about to back out now. As he approached the central nexus, the temperature began to rise. The air became thicker, more humid, and the metallic tang that had lingered earlier intensified into a near-overpowering stench. He switched on his helmet's filtration system, muttering a curse under his breath. Whatever was ahead, it wasn't going to be pretty. The Nexus was a vast cavernous space, its walls lined with pulsating organic growths that oozed a sickly green fluid. In the center of the chamber stood a towering column of intricate machinery, intertwined with the same parasitic tendrils that plagued the rest of the ship. Sparks occasionally flew from exposed wires, and the hum of barely functioning systems filled the air. Sam could feel the heat radiating from the column, a testament to the stress the ship was under. "This is the heart of the infestation," the ship said, its voice trembling. "If you sever the parasites here, I can regain control of my primary systems." Sam approached cautiously, his plasma cutter at the ready. As he neared the column, he noticed clusters of parasites, small, spider-like creatures with segmented bodies and sharp metallic appendages scuttling along the tendrils. They moved in erratic patterns, their movements quick and unsettling. Sam's stomach churned, but he forced himself to focus. "What are those things?" he asked, keeping his eyes on the parasites. "They are drones," the ship explained. "They maintain the infestation, spreading it further into my systems. They will defend the Nexus if provoked." Sam let out a slow breath, weighing his options. He could see the main connection points where the parasites had latched onto the ship's systems, their tendrils burrowing deep into the machinery. If he could sever those connections, he might be able to disable the infestation's control over the ship. But doing so would almost certainly alert the drones. "I hope you've got a plan," Sam muttered. "You must act quickly," the ship urged. "I can temporarily divert power to overload the tendril's grip, but you will need to sever the connections manually. Be prepared to fight." Sam nodded, his jaw tightening. He approached the first connection point, a thick mass of tendrils wrapped around a glowing energy conduit. The parasites twitched as he got closer, their sharp appendages clicking against the metal. With a deep breath, he activated the plasma cutter and slashed through the tendrils in one swift motion. The reaction was immediate. A shrill, piercing screech echoed through the chamber as the parasites swarmed toward him. Sam spun around, firing bursts from his plasma cutter to keep them at bay. The drones were fast, their movements unnervingly coordinated. He managed to destroy a few, their bodies disintegrating into sizzling puddles of green fluid, but more kept coming. "Focus on the connections," the ship urged. "I will handle the rest." Sam didn't have time to question how the ship planned to handle anything. He sprinted to the next connection point, dodging the drones as they lunged at him. He could feel the heat of their metallic limbs as they slashed through the air, narrowly missing him. Sweat dripped down his face as he slashed through another set of tendrils, sparks flying as the energy conduit flared to life. The ship let out a low hum, and for a moment the drones hesitated. Sam used the opportunity to move to the third connection point, but the reprieve was short-lived. The parasites adapted quickly, their movements becoming more aggressive and erratic. One of them leapt onto his back, its sharp limbs digging into his suit. Sam stumbled, nearly dropping the plasma cutter, but managed to slam himself against the wall, crushing the parasite in the process. "Two more," the ship said, its voice strained. "You are close." Sam gritted his teeth, forcing himself to keep moving. His arms ached and his breathing was ragged, but he couldn't afford to stop. He reached the fourth connection point and severed the tendrils, but not before a drone managed to slash across his arm. The pain was sharp and immediate, but his suit's medical system kicked in, injecting a numbing agent to keep him going. The final connection point was at the top of the column, accessible only by a series of precarious, rusted platforms. Sam climbed quickly, his movements fueled by adrenaline and sheer determination. The drones were relentless, swarming below him and climbing after him with unnerving speed. He reached the top just as one of the parasites lunged, its claws narrowly missing his leg. With a final burst of energy, he slashed through the last set of tendrils. The effect was instantaneous. The column flared to life, and the ship let out a sound that was almost a sigh of relief. The drones froze, their bodies convulsing before collapsing into lifeless heaps. The tendrils began to wither and retract, their grip on the ship's systems loosening. "You did it," the ship said, its voice stronger now. "The infestation has been weakened. I can feel my systems returning to me." Sam collapsed against the platform, his chest heaving. "Glad I could help," he said weakly. "This is only the beginning," the ship warned. "The core infestation remains, but now we have a chance." Sam nodded, exhaustion washing over him. He didn't know what lay ahead, but one thing was certain. There was no turning back now. Sam sat on the cold platform, his chest rising and falling with deep, labored breaths. His plasma cutter dangled loosely from his fingers, its once bright blade dimming as its energy reserves waned. The withered remains of the parasites around him had begun to emit a faint, acrid smoke, curling upward and disappearing into the shadows of the towering nexus. The ship's voice, stronger now but still tinged with a hint of fragility, broke through the silence. "You have weakened the infestation's grip on my systems, but the core remains active," the ship said. "It resides deep within me, buried in a chamber that was once my heart." Sam slowly stood, wincing as the pain in his arm flared. The wound from the parasite's claw had stopped bleeding thanks to his suit's medical system, but the ache remained a constant reminder of how close he had come to death. He looked up toward the glowing column, which now pulsed with faint light, a sign that the ship's systems were beginning to recover. "All right," he said, his voice hoarse. "Where do I go next?" A faint hum echoed through the chamber as the ship directed power to a nearby corridor. A section of the wall slid open, revealing a dark, narrow passageway. The bioluminescent tendrils that had once lined the walls were absent here, leaving the path ahead shrouded in darkness. "This tunnel will lead you to the core chamber," the ship explained, "but be warned, the infestation will not allow you to reach it without a fight." Sam nodded grimly, gripping the plasma cutter tightly as he stepped into the passageway. The darkness swallowed him, and he activated the light on his suit, casting a narrow beam ahead. The walls here were smooth, metallic, and devoid of the organic growths that had plagued the upper levels. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the sound of his boots echoing against the floor. As he moved deeper, the air grew colder, and a faint vibration began to hum through the walls. It was subtle at first, but it gradually grew stronger, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to mirror the beat of a heart. Sam couldn't tell if it was the ship's own systems or something more sinister. "The core chamber is heavily fortified," the ship said. "The parasites have concentrated their forces there. You must be prepared for an intense battle." Sam tightened his grip on the plasma cutter, his jaw set. "Do you have any weapon systems I can use? Anything to even the odds?" There was a pause before the ship responded. "My weapon systems are still offline, but I can redirect power to certain areas to assist you. Look for control panels. I will guide you to activate them manually." The passageway eventually opened into a vast, cavernous space. The core chamber lay ahead, a massive sphere suspended by thick conduits that pulsed with energy. The sphere itself was encased in a web of parasitic tendrils, their grotesque forms writhing as though alive. Clusters of drones moved across the chamber, their sharp, segmented bodies glinting in the faint light. Sam scanned the area, his mind racing. The chamber was enormous, with multiple levels connected by narrow catwalks and ladders. He could see control panels scattered throughout the space, each one glowing faintly. If he could reach them, he might be able to turn the ship's systems against the infestation. "You need to sever the tendrils connecting the core to the parasites," the ship instructed. "Once they are weakened, I will attempt to purge the core." Sam nodded and moved forward cautiously, keeping to the shadows. The drones were methodical in their movements, patrolling the chamber in tight, coordinated groups. He waited until a cluster passed before darting to the nearest control panel. His fingers flew across the interface, guided by the ship's instructions. The panel lit up, and a surge of energy crackled through the chamber, momentarily stunning the drones. "One down," the ship said. "There are 3 more panels. Hurry!" Sam didn't need to be told twice. He sprinted to the next panel, narrowly avoiding a drone as it scuttled past. He activated the second panel, and a section of the chamber's floor lit up, emitting an intense heat that forced the drones to retreat. The ship was buying him time, but the parasites were adapting. He could see them reconfiguring their patterns, blocking his path to the remaining panels. "Ship, can you create a distraction?" he asked, his voice tense. "I will attempt to overload one of the conduits," the ship replied. "Stand by." A deafening crack echoed through the chamber as one of the conduits burst, releasing a shower of sparks and sending the drones into disarray. Sam seized the opportunity, making a break for the third panel. He reached it just as a drone lunged at him, its claws scraping against his armor. He fired a burst from the plasma cutter, disintegrating the creature, before slamming his hand onto the panel's controls. The chamber trembled as another surge of energy coursed through the core. The tendrils began to writhe violently, their grip on the sphere weakening. But the remaining drones were closing in, their movements frantic and aggressive. "One more panel," the ship said. "You're almost there." Sam's muscles burned as he climbed a ladder to the upper level, his breath coming in ragged gasps. The final panel was at the far end of the chamber, surrounded by a dense cluster of drones. He gritted his teeth and pushed forward, using every ounce of his strength and agility to evade the parasites. He could feel the heat of their claws as they slashed through the air, narrowly missing him. He reached the panel and activated it just as a drone lunged at him. The impact knocked him to the ground, and the creature pinned him with its sharp limbs. Sam struggled, using the plasma cutter to slice through its body. The drone screeched and collapsed, its fluids spilling onto the floor. "The tendrils are weakening," the ship said urgently. "I need you to sever them manually. There are 6 primary connections. Cut them now." Sam staggered to his feet, his body screaming in protest. He located the first connection and sliced through it with the plasma cutter. The tendril recoiled, releasing a burst of foul-smelling gas. He moved to the next connection, repeating the process. Each cut sent shockwaves through the chamber, and the core began to pulse erratically. The remaining drones converged on him, their movements desperate and frenzied. Sam fought them off, his plasma cutter glowing red-hot from overuse. He cut through the final tendril just as the ship unleashed a surge of energy, purging the core. The chamber erupted in a blinding flash of light, and the drones collapsed, their bodies disintegrating into ash. The tendrils withered and fell away, leaving the core exposed but intact. The silence that followed was deafening. "You did it," the ship said, its voice filled with gratitude. "The core is free. My systems are mine again." Sam dropped to his knees, exhaustion overtaking him. He looked up at the glowing core, its light steady and calm. For the first time, he felt a glimmer of hope. But he knew this was far from over. The ship was alive again, but the galaxy wouldn't let such power go unnoticed. Sam sat against the cool metallic wall of the core chamber, his body heavy with exhaustion. The faint hum of the ship's systems returning to life vibrated through the floor, a steady rhythm that felt oddly reassuring after the chaos he had just endured. The air was noticeably lighter now, the oppressive stench of the parasites fading as their presence was finally purged from the core. Despite the victory, he knew there was little time to rest. The ship's voice, now calm but resolute, echoed in his earpiece. "You have done what I could not for centuries," the ship said. "But the fight is not yet over. The parasites were only a symptom of a larger threat." Sam forced himself to his feet, wincing as his muscles protested. He glanced at the exposed core, its once withering tendrils now reduced to inert fragments scattered across the chamber floor. "What do you mean?" he asked, his voice hoarse. "The parasites were deployed by an enemy force," the ship explained. "They are not a natural occurrence. Whoever created them knows I am no longer dormant. They will come." Sam's stomach tightened. The implications of the ship's words were clear. If someone had gone to the trouble of infecting a sentient warship with parasites, they would not simply ignore the fact that their weapon had been neutralized. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Uncertain," the ship replied. "I am still reactivating my long-range sensors, but I estimate we have hours, not days. You must help me prepare." Sam didn't like the sound of that. He had barely survived the parasites, and now he was expected to defend the ship against an unknown enemy? But he couldn't deny the truth of the situation. Leaving now wasn't an option, not with the ship in its current state. He took a deep breath, trying to steady his nerves. "All right," he said. "What do you need me to do?" "The first priority is restoring my weapon systems," the ship said. "The parasites drained much of my energy reserves. You will need to manually activate the auxiliary power cores. They are located in separate compartments throughout my structure. I can guide you." Sam nodded, already moving toward the chamber's exit. The plasma cutter was still clutched in his hand, its blade dim but functional. His steps were heavy, but his resolve was firm. He followed the ship's directions, navigating through corridors that were slowly coming back to life. Lights flickered on as he passed, and the faint hum of machinery grew louder with each step. The first power core was located in what appeared to be an engineering bay. The room was massive, filled with rows of dormant machinery and control panels. At the center stood the power core, a cylindrical device encased in protective plating. Tendrils of energy flickered faintly along its surface, indicating that it was still partially active. "You must reroute the power flow to bypass the damaged conduits," the ship instructed. "There should be a control terminal nearby." Sam found the terminal and began working. The interface was alien but intuitive enough for him to understand. He followed the ship's guidance, carefully rerouting energy flows and restoring connections. Sparks flew as the power core roared to life, its once dim glow now a brilliant blue. "One down," Sam muttered. "What's next?" "There are 3 more cores," the ship said. "The next one is located in the aft section. Be cautious. My sensors detect residual parasite activity in that area." Sam tensed at the warning, but pressed on. The corridors leading to the aft section were darker, the ship's systems slower to recover in this part of its structure. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the faint creaks and groans of shifting metal. Sam kept his plasma cutter ready, his eyes scanning for any signs of movement. When he reached the aft power core, he found it partially encased in the remnants of parasitic tendrils. Though the infestation had been weakened, some of the drones remained active, scuttling across the machinery as if trying to repair the damage Sam had caused. He gritted his teeth and charged forward, firing the plasma cutter in controlled bursts. The drones retaliated, their sharp limbs slashing through the air, but Sam's experience in the core chamber had prepared him for their tactics. He dispatched them quickly, the last drone collapsing in a pool of its own fluids. With the area secure, Sam approached the power core. The damage was extensive, with several conduits completely severed. "This one's in bad shape," he said. "Can it be salvaged?" "Yes," the ship replied, "but you will need to replace the damaged components manually. Look for spare parts in the storage lockers nearby." Sam located the lockers and rummaged through their contents. The components were heavy and awkward to handle, but he managed to haul them over to the power core. Sweat dripped down his face as he worked, his hands steady despite the strain. After what felt like hours, the repairs were complete, and the power core flared to life. "Two down," he said, leaning against the console to catch his breath. "The third core is located near the bridge," the ship said. "This area is heavily fortified, but it may also contain weapons that you can use." Sam's ears perked up at the mention of weapons. He hadn't seen anything resembling a proper firearm since boarding the ship, and the plasma cutter, while effective, wasn't built for prolonged combat. He made his way toward the bridge, the corridors gradually becoming more polished and structured. This part of the ship had clearly been designed for command and control, its walls adorned with faintly glowing symbols that looked like some form of alien script. The bridge itself was a sprawling, circular chamber with a massive viewport that displayed the endless expanse of space. At the center stood the power core, surrounded by control consoles and what appeared to be weapon lockers. Sam approached cautiously, his plasma cutter raised, but the area seemed clear of threats. He opened one of the lockers and grinned. Inside was a sleek alien rifle, its design both elegant and intimidating. He picked it up, feeling its weight in his hands. The rifle activated at his touch, its barrel emitting a soft hum as it powered up. "This will do nicely," he said. With his new weapon in hand, Sam activated the third power core. The ship's systems surged with renewed energy, and he could feel the structure around him becoming more vibrant, more alive. "One more to go," the ship said. "The final core is located in the lower decks. Be prepared. My sensors indicate significant structural damage in that area." Sam didn't need further encouragement. He descended into the lower decks, the air growing colder and the walls more jagged. The damage here was severe, with entire sections of the corridor collapsed or exposed to the vacuum of space. He navigated carefully, using his plasma cutter to clear debris where necessary. When he reached the final power core, he found it almost completely dormant, its surface covered in a thick layer of organic residue. The sight made his stomach churn, but he didn't hesitate. He fired the alien rifle, the weapon's energy blasts disintegrating the residue with precision. The core flickered weakly, but it was still functional. "This will take some time," Sam said as he began repairing the connections. The ship guided him through the process, its voice calm and reassuring. Despite the hostile environment, Sam felt a sense of purpose. He was no longer just a mechanic. He was a vital part of something much larger. As the final power core came to life, the ship let out a deep, resonant hum that echoed through its structure. "The weapon systems are online," it said. "You have given me the means to defend myself. The enemy will arrive soon, but we are ready." Sam slumped against the wall, his body aching but his spirit unbroken. He didn't know what kind of fight was coming, but for the first time he felt confident that they stood a chance. The ship was no longer a lifeless husk. It was alive, powerful, and ready to face whatever came next. Sam stood at the ship's bridge, the alien rifle slung across his shoulder, staring out at the black expanse of space through the massive viewport. The faint glimmers of distant stars seemed almost serene, belying the storm he knew was coming. The ship's voice resonated in his earpiece, steady and confident now, a stark contrast to the frailty it had exhibited when he first boarded. "My sensors have fully reactivated," the ship said. "An enemy fleet is on approach. Estimated time to arrival 40 minutes. Sam tightened his grip on the console in front of him. His body still ached from the ordeal of restoring the power cores, but his mind was focused. "How many ships are we talking about?" he asked. 17, the ship replied. "Primarily light and medium-class vessels, but there is one dreadnought among them. Their formation suggests they are underestimating us." Sam exhaled slowly, running his hand through his damp hair. 17 ships? Against what? Just you and me? "No," the ship said. "You are not alone in this fight. I am no longer the weakened husk they infected. I am a fully operational warship, and I have weapons they cannot comprehend. But I will require your assistance to operate at full capacity." Sam looked down at the control panels arrayed before him, their alien symbols now glowing with life. He still didn't fully understand the ship's systems, but he trusted its guidance. "All right," he said. "What's the plan?" "The plan is simple," the ship replied. "We will make them regret underestimating us." As the enemy fleet drew closer, the ship began preparing for battle. Panels across the bridge lit up, displaying tactical readouts, targeting systems, and energy reserves. Sam moved quickly, following the ship's instructions to calibrate weapon systems and redistribute power to the shields. The alien rifle he had found earlier rested within arm's reach, a last line of defense should the enemy board the ship. When the fleet appeared on the tactical display, Sam's heart sank. Even with the ship's confidence, the odds seemed insurmountable. The enemy vessels moved in a tight formation, their dreadnoughts at the center, a hulking mass of metal bristling with weapons. Smaller ships flanked it, their sleek designs optimized for speed and maneuverability. They were predators, and Sam was their prey. "Do not fear," the ship said, sensing his hesitation. "They have numbers, but we have power. Trust me." Sam nodded, swallowing his doubts. The ship's voice had become a lifeline, a steady anchor in the chaos. "Let's do this." The first enemy ships broke formation, moving ahead of the dreadnought to test the waters. They unleashed a barrage of plasma projectiles, glowing streaks of energy that hurtled toward the ship. Sam braced for impact, but the ship's shields absorbed the assault with ease, emitting a faint ripple as the energy dissipated. "My shields are holding," the ship reported. "Now, let us show them what we can do." Sam activated the primary weapons system, a series of energy cannons mounted along the ship's hull. The targeting display locked onto the advancing ships, and with a press of a glowing button, Sam unleashed a salvo of brilliant blue beams. The energy lances cut through the enemy vessels with surgical precision, reducing them to fiery debris in seconds. The remaining ships hesitated, regrouping as the dreadnought issued new commands. Sam could almost feel their confusion, their disbelief that a lone ship could possess such firepower. "They are recalibrating their strategy," the ship said, "but it will not save them." The next wave was more coordinated. Enemy ships approached from multiple angles, their weapons firing in overlapping patterns designed to overwhelm the ship's defenses. Sam worked furiously at the controls, redistributing shield power and activating countermeasures. The ship deployed a swarm of autonomous drones, each one darting through space and intercepting incoming projectiles with pinpoint accuracy. The battle was a blur of light and motion. Explosions lit up the void as enemy ships fell one by one, their wreckage drifting aimlessly. But the dreadnought remained untouched, its massive bulk looming in the distance like a harbinger of doom. "That dreadnought is their command ship," the ship said. "If we take it out, the rest will scatter. But its shields are too strong for conventional weapons." "Then what do we do?" Sam asked, his voice tight with urgency. "There is a weapon I have not yet revealed," the ship said. "It is my last resort, a relic of my creator's ingenuity. But it requires manual activation from a chamber deep within my structure. You must go there." Sam's stomach churned at the thought of leaving the bridge in the middle of a battle, but he trusted the ship. "All right," he said, "guide me." He grabbed the alien rifle and sprinted toward the designated chamber. The corridors were alive with activity now, lights and panels glowing as the ship directed power to critical systems. The hum of machinery filled the air, a constant reminder of the ship's immense capabilities. When he reached the chamber, Sam was struck by its design. The walls were lined with intricate carvings that seemed to shimmer with an inner light, and at the center stood a large cylindrical device encased in a transparent shell. The ship's voice echoed in the chamber, calm but insistent. "This is the Omega Lance," the ship explained. "It is a directed energy weapon capable of piercing any shield, but it must be fired manually. You will need to synchronize your neural signals with mine to activate it." Sam approached the device, placing his hands on the glowing panels as instructed. A surge of energy coursed through him, and for a moment he felt as though he were part of the ship itself. He could see the battlefield through its sensors, feel the pulse of its systems, and hear the distant echo of its thoughts. "The dreadnought is within range," the ship said. "Prepare to fire." Sam focused, his mind aligning with the ship's guidance. The Omega Lance charged, its core glowing brighter with each passing second. The enemy fleet seemed to sense the impending danger, their ships moving frantically to intercept. But it was too late. "Fire!" the ship commanded. Sam unleashed the weapon, and a beam of pure energy erupted from the ship's hull, cutting through space with blinding speed. The dreadnought's shields flickered and failed in an instant, the beam piercing its core and triggering a massive explosion. The shock wave rippled outward, scattering the remaining ships like leaves in a storm. As the light faded, the battlefield fell silent. The enemy fleet was gone, and the ship stood alone once more, victorious. "You did it," the ship said, its voice filled with quiet gratitude. "We did it." Sam leaned against the wall, his body trembling with exhaustion. He looked out through the viewport, watching as the wreckage of the battle drifted into the void. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, he allowed himself to breathe. "What now?" he asked. "Now," the ship said, "we rebuild. Together." Sam smiled faintly. He didn't know what the future held, but he knew one thing for certain. He wasn't alone anymore. The ship had been more than a vessel. It had become a partner, a friend, and perhaps even something greater. Together they had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. Whatever came next, Sam was ready.